So welcome, as I said, to this second Working Smarter group session. Appreciate your time to attend this one. So, brief recap, we talked a little bit about some of the fundamentals of my book, The Lazy Project Manager. Last week, just some of the principles. We touched on to something around the area of prioritization. Remember, we looked at the Pareto principle as it's relevant to the priority list that we all have, the to-do list that we all have. And I mentioned that there was a kind of tool that I've used for a simple calculation, and I was going to share that with you this week. So that's what I'm going to do. Again, this is me, Peter Taylor, and that's all my information, but you can find all of this onto the Tribe site as well, so let's not dwell on that too long. If you've read The Lazy Project Manager, then you'll know about the dinosaur theory, part one. Part one of the dinosaur theory was the fact that projects, unlike dinosaurs, this is a play on the Monty Python sketch of Miss Anne Elk talking about her theory of brontosauruses being thin at one end, much thicker in the middle and thin again at the far end. And I kind of use this as a counter statement, saying that actually projects are not like that at all. Projects are thick at the start, thick at the far end, and it should be, from a project manager's point of view, thin in the middle, because the heart of a project is about the project team working efficiently and effectively. And I kind of use this crazy imagery, if you like, to try and explain that to people, because people have did views about what a project manager should be doing from the start to the end of the project. And one of the concerns I've always had is that project managers get so deeply involved in the detail, so busy, that they do not have any time at all to prioritize their own efforts. The project manager should be certainly in the middle part of the project. Once they've got the foundations in place, and at the far end it's all about learning the lessons and closing the project off properly. But in the middle, it really is about, as I said, the effectiveness and efficiency of your team, and you being there as a project manager to spend a lot of your time being proactive, going around thanking people for their efforts, inquiring about how things are moving forward and taking a personal interest, etc. But also then having the flexibility to become very reactive very quickly when there are problems. And my concern has always been a project manager who operates at 100% capacity throughout a project can't do that, because if a problem occurs and they have to throw their efforts, their thought, their time at it, well, then that means they're stopping to doing something else, and that's always been a problem as far as I'm concerned. So the dinosaur theory part one was all around that. And the dinosaur theory part two was the fact that if you think about a dinosaur, then actually carrying it is a really bad idea. If you think about the project in this way, carrying a project is a really bad idea. I joke about eating it is probably acceptable in the middle there if it's a dinosaur, but actually riding it is a much better way. It's effectively is working in the right way for your project. If you are the sole person that's carrying all of the weight of the project, this is again a very bad thing from a project manager's point of view. And I certainly experienced that in my early days, where I found myself working on projects in a very ineffective way because I was too involved in every piece of communication, every decision point, etc. So this is the dinosaur theory part two. But then this is an exercise I use on some of the workshops I run, and it's around what is important. And Stephen Covey, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I'm sure everybody's heard of this one. The key is not to prioritize what's on your schedule, but to schedule your priorities. And when I talked last week, I talked about applying the 80-20 rule to your priority list, which was typically 20% of what's on your to-do list is really, really important. 20% delivers the 80%. And it's a matter of finding out what is in that 20% and then what sequence you should be doing them. As I mentioned, it's not about not doing everything on the list. It's about doing the things that are most important. And the fact that you might have turned up in the morning at work and you've got yourself a coffee, you've organized delivery of some cabbages online, you've booked a meeting room, you've got a brand new pen and pad, and maybe those things were on your to-do list, but the fact is you really haven't made any real progress. What you've done, in fact, is just tick things off your to-do list that were perhaps the oldest or perhaps the easiest as well, and that's also a danger for people. So, what is really important, and this is the kind of exercise I take people through. So what I say is that the first thing is, you have a list, and the first thing is you have this description of what it is you want to do, what you need to do. So there we have a very simple list of things that that I might want to do. I might have to do. So I'm running the project. I need to arrange the next team event, and this is actually overdue. I've been meaning to do this. I haven't got around to it. Then we have a reschedule meeting with a supplier, and then we have a write post or latest blog on the project site. They're very keen for this sort of thing. Then there's a review in the notes for a steering meeting. And finally, perhaps there's a respond to request to speak at an event, something I do as well, of course. Well, there you go. So the initial ranking is, as you can see there, is follows the sequence. So the oldest one is the arrangement of the next team event. Because it's the oldest, it's ranked number 1. And then you've got supplier, then you've got the project blog, then you've got steering meeting, and then you've got request to speak. But really, that may not be the most important thing. If I start working on arranging the next team event, it may actually not be the most important thing. So if you think about importance, what I've done here, I've used a score of 1 to 10, and you can have a range whatever you might like, really. I think numerical, go with it, but I'm using 1 to 10. So I'm saying to arrange the next team event, it's overdue, so therefore it is important. I mean, if you don't have these team events, then it's quite negative on morale. People think, your team think you've got more important things to do than worry about them, and actually projects are about people, so you really should care about your project team. So I've given that an 8 importance. Rescheduling the meeting with a supplier, well, it's a supplier, and yes, I mean, I need to talk to them, but it's not of critical importance, so I'm putting it right in the middle there. I'm going to give it a 5. Writing or posting the latest on the blog site, well, I'm giving that a 4. It's not that important. I mean, it's nice to have. It's okay, but it's not really important. Reviewing the notes for steering meeting, well, we don't like going into such meetings unprepared, do we? So I'm giving that a 9. And respond to request to speak at an event, I'm giving that an 8 as well. It's quite important I do respond, because if you don't respond, then you kind of, you're in a risk of situation of losing the interest at that point. You're seen as rude or unprofessional or whatever. So now we've got a new ranking based on importance. And what we've got here is review notes for steering committee meeting number 1. Equally in second place is the team events and the request to speak. And then we've got the meeting with the supplier, and then we've got the latest blog. So that's the ranking based on importance. What about impact? Now, impact is, what if I don't do this? What if I don't actually do this? In which case, I'm saying that, well, if I don't arrange the next team event, the impact's going to be quite high as well. As I said, the team expect these things. It's part of their, it's part of the community and the community spirit and the engagement, and they like these team events. They're important to them. It's a bit of downtime from the project work. So I think the impact is quite high. I'm giving that an 8. If I don't reschedule the meeting with supplier, well, with all respect, it is a supplier. We'll find a way to talk to them if necessary. So again, I'm giving that a midpoint impact of 5. If I don't write the latest blog, again, it's a middle point. It's neither really critical or not important at all. So I'm giving that a 5. If I review the notes for a steering meeting, it's 8. If I don't do that, the impact of going into a meeting unprepared can be quite significant. Yeah, we've all winged it at some point in our lives, but not ideal. And if I don't respond, or if I don't actually get around to responding to requests to speak, I mean, the impact is 3. I mean, they'll go off and find someone else to speak, and I'll lose that opportunity. And now we have yet another ranking where the team event is number 1, along with the steering meeting. Equally in third position is the supplier and the project site blog, and actually the request to speak is at 5. But the real key here is when you put all those together. It's a bit like your risk calculations. If you multiply the importance with the impact, you get an overall score. And I think this is a very balanced way of looking at your priorities. So by doing that, we look at that, we can see that in first place here is the steering meeting. I guess we could probably reach that viewpoint fairly quickly, but it's very important and the impact is very high. So that definitely has position number 1. Number 2 is the team event, because the importance and the impact were both reasonably high. Third place was rescheduling the meeting with the supplier, which has kind of risen up the ranks overall. It's a midpoint, but it's a 5 times 5, so it's quite it's produced it and moved it to position number 3. if I don't respond to requests, we had a high importance but a relatively low impact, so let's put it in position number 4. And the blog post, low importance and midpoint impact, so that's position number 5. So now, if you think about this, this is a way of finding a very balanced view of looking at this. And once you've got this, well, I always set the people on the workshops that I run, well, what would you do about this? And kind of clearly in this group there are 2 levels of priority here. There's the 2 high ones, which is obviously the steering meeting and the team event, and then the other 3 are relatively low in comparison scores. They're only scoring 20, 24, and 25, as opposed to the 64, 72 for the top 2. So kind of the potential actions could be that maybe you delegate some of the low ones to someone else in the team. So by having this recalibration of the priorities, you can then sort of decide what you want to do about it. And the suggestion here is that for the low ones, you could get someone else to do it. I mean, who would enjoy the exposure of writing for the project blog? Someone might be a keen writer or wants to begin to do something like that. Is there somewhere else on the team who might be a good presenter, perhaps? I mean, if you respond and say, well, I'm really busy, but look, there's someone on my team I think could do a really good job. That's a great opportunity for someone to speak at the event for you or for your project or whatever that event is. I mean, you need to consider that. But there's some stuff you could do there. You could also, seek some support for the high rank items. I mean, could someone review the steering meeting notes? Clearly, someone you trust, and sometimes an objective view is a really good thing. What about the next team event? It's overdue, we know that, so why not find someone else who might enjoy putting together such an event for you, perhaps with a lower level involvement from yourself. Maybe you acting as a kind of sponsor for it or overseer of those plans, but someone would be very keen. Someone might have some really good ideas, what they'd love to do, bring some new level of energy and interest into the whole team activity. So the idea behind all this is that you don't just take the to-do list, you don't just take the oldest thing and deal with it. What you actually do is you consider the true ranking, and I think one way of doing this is this consideration of importance and impact. As I said, you can score this how you like. You could have different factors if you think they're the right factors for you, but I think the principle is a good one in the sense that you don't necessarily just take the gut feel of what it feels to be the most important thing, and sometimes we'll respond that way. The most important thing seems to be the most imminent or closest, and actually you could actually say that's a 3rd dimension you could add to this if you want to get really clever with these sort of calculations. Personally, I feel that's getting a little bit too complicated, but what is the timeline to this? How quickly does each of these things have to be done? But I think just having these 2 categories of importance and impact already gives you a fresher view, I think, of your to-do list. And as part of that is the fact that once you've got these things underway, you can extend this. I mean, there are only 5 things on this list, and you may well have 10, maybe 20 in your to-do list, and you might have more than that, and that's something you're going to have to kind of juggle and deal with. But the idea is very much that you consider your priorities on a regular basis, and you recalibrate, recalculate, reassess your priorities on a regular basis. So you are always working on the thing that is most critical or is most important, and not the oldest. And then the other thing I say when I do present is I talk about the fact that we procrastinate a lot, we put things off, and that's something you've got to avoid as well, because if there is something in here that's really difficult, then maybe the reason I haven't dealt with the next team meeting is because I've run out of ideas. I'm sure I've exhausted every brilliant idea I've got for team building, and maybe I need some help with this. So actually, this approach of having someone else come in and work with me and take primary responsibility, if you like, will be a really good thing. Maybe just going back to the team and asking them for ideas. How can I overcome this blockage I've got? Is why haven't I done that? It's overdue. It's overdue, which is not good. So why have I left this one so late? What is it that's been going on that hasn't allowed me to focus on it? So I don't know. It's an idea. It's just something I wanted to share with you that might be useful. And now I'm going to come back to video. Okay, so this is where we open it up to the group. we talk about whatever you want to talk about. So, first of all, are there any reflections on what I just talked about? Thoughts? Interesting? Completely useless? So you've done something even better than that? Who wants to be first up to comment and join the conversation?
Hi, Peter. This is Gerald.
Hi, Gerald. Oh, well, thank you, by the way, for the posting you did on the forum. Thank you for that, sharing that.
You're welcome. I hope someone finds it useful. And by the way, about the posting, I mean, if other people have any templates they can upload or macros, please, I'll be also curious to see what others have.
Yeah, absolutely. So we always encourage people to go to the forum on the group. So go to the group site itself, go into Working Smarter, and then use the forum there to start posting or continuing the conversations. But thank you, Gerald. You were going to say something.
Yeah. Well, for your action list also, I had something similar for myself, but also as a PMO, I rely heavily on the contributions of others. So in my thoughts about importance of an action is also the thinking, is there someone else who has to deliver something by a certain date? And that gets then up in the importance, because like you want to give them at least 2 or 3 days to, let's say, create a slide or something for your next YIRCO or something. So otherwise you make your own problem their problem, because you were too busy to ask them for something, and then it's down to hours or who knows what, you know. So that just can have an impact on the importance. And also, by the way, I mean, you do it very scientifically. I mean, of course, one could also, I mean, with the impact column, I would have just sort of mentally put the impact into the importance, you know. So if something is with a high impact, is automatically a high importance, but just to make it easier. But I guess, that's, just personal preference, I suppose.
Yeah, and that's a fair point. I mean, some people are just really good at that when they look at something like that. This is more of like, if you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed, this is a way of breaking it out and making you kind of think about it in a slightly different way. I mean, if you're on top of the situation, if you're dealing with your priorities, if you're feeling very confident, then there's no need for something like this. But if you're feeling you're struggling a little bit, you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed, too much is going on, you don't know what you should be working on first, that you are perhaps at the whim of others as you bounce around, you know, and you're driven by their priorities and not your own, then this is perhaps a way of like thinking about it. That's you know, that's all I'm offering out there, really.
Oh, sure, no doubt about an action list. It was just about the impact column.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah,
basically, I mean, maybe optional or depending on certain situation.
Yes, and you make a valid point about the fact that, you know, some of these things are dependent on others, and that you do have to take that into account as well. You know, something that is important and critical for you, something that you want to get done. If you are waiting, I mean, maybe in my example there, you know, the team event is overdue because, you know, maybe I've given the team the opportunity to decide what they want to do, and they haven't come back to me yet. Like, well, okay, it's overdue because it's not overdue because necessary for me. So yes, you have to kind of consider that lead time to your ability to execute on your actions as well.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else have any thoughts?
Hey, Peter, this is John.
Hi, John. Yeah, I can hear
you. I was just thinking, looking back at your slide on the dinosaur and thinking about some of the conversations before. You know, how much time do you allow when you're in the middle of the project? You know, when you're talking about riding the dinosaur, you talked about some time, and I know a lot of the working smarter relates to having time to actually think through things and think up better ways, and as well as look at the other things that's going on in your action list. How much time do you think should be allowed to that if you had a heavy project that you're working on?
Yeah, and it's not constant. I mean, there are certain times when you are locked into certain activities. Whether you're going through maybe like a sort of a deep gap analysis workshop period or something like that. There's times where you can't necessarily reflect in the right way. But I think it's a matter of making sure you allocate yourself some time to do it. I don't know what the number is, but I know that I see projects, when I go in and help organizations and look at some of the projects, we need to kind of do health checks on projects and support project managers in their work. Often what we see is the project manager becomes overwhelmed. They become overwhelmed because they're just too busy. And actually, to be fair, that can be sometimes too busy because they have too many projects to run. But equally, they don't spend any time sitting back, considering the direction of the project, how they're progressing at that kind of higher level. And that's a real weakness, because part of the project manager's job is to guide the project towards an end goal, and to do their very best to anticipate problems and troubles ahead, rather than constantly being in a reactive state. When I was a fully active project manager and I was working on the sort of projects I was typically running, I would often have 4 or 5 projects at any given time at various different stages. And, I really tried in those days to ensure that I had at least a couple of hours a day that were not locked away to doing stuff, which led me free to think about stuff, to do the kind of thought expansion processes of anticipating, trying to see where this might go, what I haven't thought about, what I've forgotten about, etc. To also spend some time thinking about the project team, how were things with them, had I gone back to Joe or Julie about that problem they had, or inquiry that had come through. Just to do those sort of things. I think it's like everything in life, isn't it? If you move from back-to-back meetings, then when do you actually get any work done? And if you're a project manager, you move from back-to-back decision points or hard communicative activities. Then when do you do any consideration or reflecting on what you should be doing and where this is going overall? And otherwise, if you don't do that, I think suddenly you can find yourself heading in a very bad direction. So I'm not sure I can give you a figure. Does anybody else have any sort of guidelines along those areas, or any personal practices they have?
Yeah, a couple hours seems like a long. I don't think probably many of us in projects have that kind of luxury, but it sure sounds like a good idea to me to have some time at least.
Yeah, I mean, one of the exercises I do with project managers when I work with them is if you just get people, I said you can have a very simple, like an Excel spreadsheet. You just put in bold lines for what it is, emails, meetings, reports, status, stakeholder meetings, all those sort of things. Just a list, and then you get them to fill in the hours they're actually running over the last, maybe the last couple of weeks. It's very easy for them to suddenly visually see the fact that they're working at capacity or beyond capacity, and something needs to change. And yeah, maybe 2 hours is very generous. I said I aspire to that, but. And to be fair, in those days, I was doing a lot of traveling to client sites because they were client-facing projects. So I actually found, time whilst I was in the car. These were wonderful days before we had, mobile phones. I'm that old. That there was the beauty of actually having some peace and quiet and some contemplation and time, which you were driving back, the hour or hour and a half, whatever it is, after you've left the client site. So, it wasn't just the fact I just sat in an office or on the client site and just sat there for 2 hours apparently doing nothing. It was finding the time to do this sort of thing.
Hi, it's Lynn here.
Hi, Lynn. Welcome.
Thank you. I think most of us are fine with understanding impact. A couple of companies I've worked for actually went and made us define what was the key driver, whether it was schedule, cost, scope, etc., and that helps prioritizing that. But I think we're hinting at how do we define important? And one of the tricks I've learned to use over the years is to think 6 months after my project is finished. What are people going to remember about it? Why is it successful, or why did it fail? Is to, force ourselves to think that bigger picture. And I don't know, and I would be interested to hear if other people have tricks that they use to get them out of that, micromanagement, detailed-oriented world we get ourselves into, and to be able to pull ourselves back to really reflect on what is important.
Yeah, I have some thoughts around some work. I think the PMO could actually be helping here. But before I do that, has anybody got any comment back to Lynn?
Well, some methodologies, of course, have the benefits management and stuff. So after 6 months, revisit if the benefits have been realized, or if the organization is not mature enough to measure benefits. That is, I mean, I haven't seen one yet.
Yeah, thanks, Gerald. That's exactly where I was going with it, and I haven't seen many people or firms really implement a good benefits management process either.
Hi, this is Caroline. In my organization, our drivers tend to be our KPIs, which is determined early on in the project, but then revisited, prior to it going into an operations mode. And so what we've implemented is we have the KPIs are monitored by the project manager up to a year after the implementation or the project is quote-unquote done. And then we pass that responsibility off to the operations owner to monitor those KPIs for the next 3 years. I work in healthcare, so a lot of the projects that we implement, we don't see those realizations or those benefits realize themselves until almost years after. You don't see it immediately. And so that's kind of the approach that we're taking. This is fairly new in our organization, but I have found that it does help when we're looking at prioritizing our work, and what we define as success is really tracking those KPIs.
Great.
Are those KPIs the same across all projects, or are they set up for each project individually?
Set up for each project individually. So although we have the overarching organizational, goals and or KPIs, we do have those that we set for the project individually, and those are the ones that are essentially translated over, or the responsibility is transferred over to the business owner to continue tracking until, until I think it's like a 3-year mark.
Michael here. Just had some thoughts on this in the sense of the 6 months afterwards is great if we can do it, but I think we need to know if we're working on...
Can you speak up? I can't hear you.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, a little bit louder, Michael, will be good, yeah.
A little closer. So...
Yeah, that's good.
All right. So what I'm thinking is during the project, being aware of what's the most important. Like doing the matrix is great. That's from my point of view, the team's point of view. But the stakeholders, the sponsor, the end unit client, if we're not having discussions with them, we may be working on what we perceive to be the most important without factoring in something that they haven't told us. So there's, I think a constant ongoing communication with the stakeholders is the key that allows us to stay on track. And ultimately, if we do get the benefit statement at the end of the day, then we will actually deliver what they are expecting. But it's very hard to get that benefit statement out from the beginning. But if you talk to the stakeholders, listen to the stakeholders, they'll give us clues. And it's just factoring in what those clues might tell us. So, just a thought.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I think it is difficult. I mean, I've not worked in an organisation, I would say, that actually has truly manage those benefits. I mean, what we incorporated in my last company and the one before that was, what we called a benefits trajectory, which was the fact that one of the last things a project manager would do would be to look at the original business case and attempt to do a trajectory calculation where we thought the benefits would be delivered. So, I'm going to use a very simple example. Let's say this project was undertaken to bring about, $3 million in business benefit of, revenue, say, over a 2-year period. Well, the project's finished, and based on the realities of the project and what was finally delivered and the realities of the business at this point, do we still think 3 million over 2 years is the right number, or actually are we going to report out an estimated final trajectory of benefits of, say, 2 million over a 3-year period or something like that? I said very simple example, but that kind of at least gave a flavour. I mean, the biggest problem we found in organisations was the lack of anybody to take any responsibility for tracking these benefits afterwards. There just wasn't anybody. The sponsors weren't particularly interested at that point. They had the new projects coming on board, and they seemed to be more exciting. There was an assumption that if a project was delivered, it would therefore deliver by default the original benefits, and we all know that often really isn't the case. But that final trajectory statement allowed to give us some insight into the sort of returns of investment that we were seeing on projects for our clients, and it equally allowed us to, as we looked at new business cases coming forward, to perhaps apply some sort of considered factoring of what is likely to come out based on historical projects that have gone before and have or have not succeeded in a original benefits chart targets. So that's something we have done. We had done anything similar to that? Maybe not. Maybe not. It's a tough subject, but it's benefits realization. But I can go back to we're talking about the productivity of project managers, and we started a conversation about, well, how much time can you allocate yourself to do the things you should be doing over and above the detailed managing activities. And I think one of the things that certainly PMOs can contribute here, and it's something I've tried to do, is to look closely at the methodologies that they are demanding their project managers run projects against. And the move is very much away from methodologies, far more towards a framework of capability, so that the most experienced project managers can have a very light touch, but still deliver some of the key deliverables, of course, and still deliver whatever is mandated as the required sort of governance steps and outputs, but to make it as light as possible. And I think by doing that, removing the burdensome overhead of administration and replication of information flow, etc., then it does begin to free up some project managers' time to become more effective in applying their thoughts and their intelligence and their time to the project overall. And again, I'm a strong believer in a lot of the existing and certainly emerging technology that allows some of the basic drudgery of project reporting and calculation and anticipation of progress, etc., freeing up the project manager to do the thing that's probably far more interesting for a project manager, which is looking after their people and making sure the project is on track. So that's my view on that. I mean, again, to the group, any considerations in that area? Do you believe in the value of tools in these areas as kind of aids to project managers? Do you believe in the light methodology, or are you strong advocates of the more traditional, fairly heavy, centralized, strong governance sort of type of methodology?
Well, I've worked in regulatory projects in banking, and our experience was that for like global programs, you almost needed almost one person for the methodology for all the documents required.
Yes.
So we try to do it I'm an advocate for light touch based on that experience. So, but it was not the experience I had.
No, and that's when there's an argument out there for project office to support the project or program manager, again, to get on with the job they're supposed to be doing, but to take the burden of some of the demands of regulatory reporting and standard methodology adherence, etc. That's an ideal statement that you can make it as light as possible, but I realise that certain organisations just don't go that way, and I worked for a large German organisation that was incredibly heavy on governance and quality assurance steps and processes, and it was very painful for project managers to have to apply all of the things that most of us sort of didn't think were actually truly relevant to the sort of projects that we were delivering, which were fairly short, sharp, and relatively low risk and low cost. So unfortunately, that organisation applied a one rule, one size for everybody, and that was something we had to just live with.
Was the project methodology for the German company, was that by any accident Hermes?
No, it wasn't. No, it was an in-house methodology. But to be fair, most of the burden was from the quality assurance components. They just had some bad experiences in projects, and it's a bit like I describe it as if you cut your finger, you put a little plaster on it, a plaster plaster, whatever, and if you hit it again, you then put a bandage on it, and if you hit it again, you put a plaster cast on it, and you keep doing that. What I realised is, do you need all of those things just because something else has happened? Do you just keep all of the historical quality assurance processes, which and they just seem to accumulate? And I'm a strong believer again that quality assurance should deliver quality and not just become a thing of its own, and that was the problem in that particular company. And to be fair, after a reasonable period of time, we did find a way to get our argument across, and they did produce a light version of their QA governance process for the sort of projects that we were running. What about the group? Anybody else? Who haven't we heard from? We've got quite a broad range of conversation going on here about prioritization and methodology and project managers' time, etc. So anything in those areas, feel free to speak up.
What about introducing new resources? For example, prioritizing your time in actually covering activities, but having someone new come into the team, and you've got to put some time into training them and bringing them into the framework that you've got.
Yeah, that's always the dilemma of extra resources, isn't it? It's in the immediate moment, perhaps it's quicker for you to do it yourself, but in the long term, that isn't going to be the case. You have to take that long-term view, I think, on it, of how quickly you can bring someone up to speed. And again, a lot of that depends on the quality of the resources you've got. How many times have we talked about someone hitting the ground running? That's really what we want, but there is always a handover and a ramp up activity. And again, I think it's an argument of fact. Well, if a project manager is going flat out and just doesn't do anything to change it, then it's never going to get any better. It's not going to improve. John? So, John, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think a lot of this that we're talking about kind of depends on your team members themselves and their own experience and their capabilities and stuff like that. So, it gets back to, are you able to get the right people on your team? Are you stuck with people that really have a lot of time on their hands or something like that? And making the best. I mean, I'm sure we've all been on extremely well-functioning teams and other teams that are not that well-functioning. And, if you don't know the people, you're kind of dependent on some of those things that causes you then to go back and manage them closer and spend your time doing those things and helping them succeed versus other things. That was what I was going to say.
Yeah, no, I get it. And to a degree, there's nothing wrong with helping them to succeed. If they have the right attitude. Unfortunately, we also know we get resources allocated to us that there's no choice. That's the person who's doing this job, and they are resistant, reluctant, whatever, difficult to deal with, and that takes an even larger amount of time and is very big distraction to a project manager in trying to handle this particular difficult resource. But that's life. That's part of the whole team management activity, etc., isn't it?
Can you share some more best practices around that? I mean, were you able to get rid of some or exchange some or I mean, we've also in our programs we had some team members, but somehow our program manager always then managed to say, no, we can't work with this one.
Oh, right.
And put in an order in for someone else. So
that's nice. That's nice. Yeah, that's nice if that happens. Absolutely. I think the first thing I'd say is you've got to make yourself attractive to people. In the sense, if you have a great reputation inside your organisation as a project manager who works in a really good way, supports their team, etc., then when the next project comes up, I mean, you hopefully you will attract the right people. You might attract the same people you worked with in the past, or people come to you and go, well, I really want to work with you because I hear good things about your project management style. You have a good time on your projects, and you have success. That's great. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is, well, have I ever got rid of anybody off a project? None in a good way, to be honest. You tend to get stuck with who you get stuck with. I've learned to be a little bit more guarded when I've started saying yes to the resources that are being presented to me and finding out a bit more about them. Like if I have no experience of them, then go and find out if they've worked on other projects and talk to those project managers to understand what sort of character they are. And the one experience which is was kind of waste. If you remember back to last week when I talked about the Moltke, the Field Marshal of the Prussian Army, and the 4 quadrants, and there was that the not very smart but hyperactive, busy, hardworking people who distract you. Then I had an extreme case of that, and this particular person was incredibly distracting. They never seemed to do any actual real work, but they always had things they wanted to talk about. Ideas. They would stop me in the corridor, had a brilliant idea. They were difficult in meetings. After meetings, they would send you that really long email somehow within moments of the meeting finishing with lots of bullet point ideas about improvements that could be made. And the frustration for myself and the rest of the team was that this person was just wasting lots of people's time. And in the end, the only way I could actually deal with it was I created a little kind of sub-project for them. I convinced them they were the only people who could do it. And it was sort of associated with what we were doing, but it really was mostly made up. It wasn't truly necessary. And by giving them that, and putting them on a corner somewhere and told them to get on with it, they got so excited about this and they felt this was so important that they stopped bothering everybody else. And the rest of my team loved me for a period of time. Until they finished that little sub-project that I made up, and they then came back and bothered everybody again. But it's a kind of difficult thing. So no, I haven't actually got rid of anybody off the team. People have left the team for various reasons, of course, over the years and the various projects I've run. But actually to remove someone that had been allocated to me, I haven't managed to do that, no. Anybody else? Anybody else had a brilliant technique?
Well, what helped in our case was like we could say, well, this person's too junior, we can't. Sorry. And
yeah. Okay. So you kind of, the easiest is to stop them joining in the first place and having to deal with them once they've joined. But again, I suppose the right thing to do is to find out why are they difficult, why are they awkward, why are they feeling challenged, and we all have good periods of our life and periods of our life when we're a little bit more challenged. It may or may not be their fault. They might have other stuff going on in life. It comes back down to, again, a lot of it down to the project manager having time to understand these things.
Well, actually, in all fairness, the person was nice, but didn't have the skills.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and I think that's perhaps an easier one to challenge and push back on. So say, well, look, it's not about the person; it's about their level of capability. And this is having this impact on the project. It's slowing things down, and will produce perhaps a lower quality output. And if that's the case, then you might have an easier conversation with their manager or your sponsor to make something change on the project from that point of view.
I have a quick question, and maybe slightly unrelated. I was just wondering if you could share any advice on how to deal with a project sponsor who may be a little scatterbrained, a little bit of a reactive type of approach when it comes to projects, and just trying to kind of, I just feel like I'm constantly trying to hone in that person to focus on what's the scope of the project and what's important, but I don't know if you've had any experience on that before and how to handle it.
Oh, lots, and it's almost a topic I say. In fact, it was a topic I was going to have for one of the later calls. I mean, I'm certainly happy to, if you're available next week, then I'm certainly happy to have that as the theme for next week's session, if you like, because there is a lot of things you can do in the area of project sponsorship, and it's one of the other books I've written, which is strategies for project sponsorship, and there's some techniques I think around working with sponsors, how you can understand more about sponsors, how you can consider their capability and confidence, and also about how you can go about, if you like, improving the level of sponsorship inside your own organization. So if that's something that would be interesting to the group, I'm happy to cover that next week.
Yeah, yep. I'd be interested. I would really appreciate it.
Can you wait that long, Caroline? Or have you an immediate urgent need?
It'd be immediate, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, if we can cover that off next week, that'd be great. But if you have something, if you want to message me directly, Caroline, then do so, and I'll try and respond to your specific situation.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Cool. Okay. Any more comments, thoughts, suggestions? Anything anybody would like to cover in a future session? Then let me know now. Or let me know on the forum in the group as well. No? Okay. So what I would ask is, and I always say, this is the second time I've said it because this is obviously session 2. I hope you come away with some sort of inspiration. We'd like to try and help you and guide you on problem resolution as well. Please, join the group if you haven't joined the group already. If you're in the group, then I send out a recurring meeting invitation, so it's locked into your diaries as and when you can make it. But I can also, if you're in the group, we can also make sure that you're getting all the information that we share and stuff that follows on from this. On the forum in the group, please, comments, share your ideas or thoughts, share any guidelines, documents, tools, anything like that would be good as well. And make sure you make friends with each other inside the PM tribe itself and keep that community build going. Any final thoughts?
No,
if not, yeah?
Yeah, I really like the idea of the framework of capabilities.
Okay, great. Thank you. We'll make a note of that. That's great. And what I suggest is now we'll close off the call at this point. The recording will be up in the next 24 hours. We had a bit of a technical problem last week, but it is up there now from last week. And please, let's extend the community. So if you've got anybody you think would like to join the tribe, you know how it works, your members already, then just send out an invitation to them and tell them to come along and experience it over their the trial period and see if it's fine value for them. In the meantime, thank you very much for your time, and I hope you have a good rest of the day or evening, and I'll speak to you again in a week's time.